for being such a great supporter of World EV Day, and thank you very much indeed for joining us as our fourth and final speaker on this EV Summit panel looking at the green recovery. So Daniel, if you perhaps could open up with some words on ubitricity and what ubitricity does and how you're helping to transition the shift to electrification.
Absolutely, and thank you, Aid, on this momentous day. Happy World EV Day to you. I'm looking forward to next year already. And it's been great to be part of such a great event so far. As you mentioned, ubitricity are the largest lamppost charging infrastructure partner in the UK, the second largest public charge point operator. We operate in a number of major cities across the UK, and really what makes ubitricity different to a lot of the other charging infrastructure partners out there is that we're looking to operate within the existing infrastructure that we have today. So I've been part of this journey now for the last 2 years or so. Started my career in energy systems, new technologies, and what I'm doing here at ubitricity is making that a reality. And what we're doing is that we are connecting our low-cost lamppost chargers, which can be fitted into lampposts and bollards and electrical cabinets on the streets, connecting to the existing electricity infrastructure. So there are no additional connection charges. We're not creating those constraints, and we're bringing those charge points to where cars park today. And that has allowed us then to roll out around 2,400 charge points in the last 18 months in the UK. And it means that we are giving people who don't have off-street parking the opportunity to own an EV or lease an EV, park very close to their home, if not right outside their home, and really make a difference to our urban environments where the benefits of EVs will be felt strongest and soonest in terms of carbon reduction, in terms of emissions, and also improving air quality. So, but one thing that people don't really understand about ubitricity is that our very long company name is not ubitricity. It's actually Ubitricity Distributed Energy Systems UK Limited. And we see ourselves as forming a part of that smart, flexible, low carbon energy system in the years to come. What we're doing is that by encouraging customers to plug in and connect the electricity system whenever they're parked, we are then creating an asset for the energy system. And as mentioned earlier on by Isbrand around vehicle to grid, well, actually there's a step before that, which is around smart charging. And if we're able to connect cars to the grid for the 95% of their lifetime that they are actually parked, we can then use those as assets to manage the electricity system, which then allows us then to integrate more renewables. So there is this holistic, joined up approach to low carbon green recovery that we are seeing ourselves being a part of.
Very good. Thanks very much indeed, Daniel, for those opening thoughts and for that insight into ubitricity and your wider work. So to move on to the focus for the panel discussion today, which is the green recovery. I mean, what's your personal sense and what's the ubitricity business sense of where we are in this moment in time around excitement, government support, investor support, boardroom support for eMobility? Do you feel like there is a green recovery underway that is benefiting the eMobility sector?
Certainly there's green recovery underway, but it's very much green shoots. I think that's how we should describe it at the moment, green shoots of a green recovery. And the green recovery, in our view, is much wider than just EVs in the transport sector, but EVs are at the epicenter in our view. So there are 3 key areas where we're seeing the green recovery really starting to take hold. Obviously the transport sector now around road transport, rail and aviation as well is now under a great deal of scrutiny about how do we then move to a green and more sustainable way of moving people, moving goods around. On the other hand, we also have the energy sector as well, which is very close to my heart, is then how do we transition to more renewables and how do we integrate more renewables into our electricity system? And then how do we transition our fossil fuel heating, fossil fuel led transport onto green electricity? And underpinning all of this, another area which is seeing a huge amount of investment is the digital services sector. So data is key to all of this going forward and will be the way that we manage our systems in a more efficient way. And at the center of those 3 converging industries at the moment are the EVs. So we're seeing that EVs are not only helping us to reduce our carbon emissions from transport, improving our air quality in our urban centres, But by using those EVs as an asset that we can then draw on, we can then integrate more renewables. So plugging in for long periods of time, being able to schedule the charging. People often don't realize that actually 90% of charging events will happen at home, at work, or on the street. And that will also coincide with 95% of a vehicle's lifetime. It remains stationary, parked, unused for its primary purpose. So we must then unlock that as an asset. And by doing that, we're able then to integrate more renewables and consume renewable power when the wind is blowing, when the sun is shining. And in order to manage all of this, we need those smart platforms, those digital systems, to be able to forecast and predict and build out those models, but then to respond to those changing environments and to manage it in a smart way. So I see there's a great deal of optimism because we've seen investment in all those areas. I still think it's very early stage for some of those sectors. I think there's a lot of work to do within the EV space, particularly around the infrastructure. At the moment, people seem to be in a bit of a test and learn stage. We're trying lots of different technologies, AC or DC, slow charges up to rapid charges. What's the mix, what's the blend that any particular society needs? But very quickly we'll need to land on something which means that we can accelerate this from the 8,000 or so new registrations of battery electric vehicles last month to tens of thousands of battery vehicles registered each month, and the millions of vehicles that we need on the road in the years to come. So that's the general view from ubitricity, and my personal view as well.
Very good. Thank you. I've asked you about a kind of top-down approach from board level, governments, investors around the green recovery. I know ubitricity has an offer which perhaps democratizes the charging infrastructure network to people who maybe don't have houses that are large enough for off-street charging infrastructure in their homes. So do you see a kind of grassroots, bottom-up green recovery that an organization like ubitricity can help with those consumers that perhaps can't afford off-street parking, off-street charging infrastructure?
Absolutely. So we do benefit at the moment from a good level of government support. You may have heard of a scheme called the On-Street Residential Charging Scheme, or AUX. That fund has been doubled at least 3 times over the last 24 months or so. It's currently around £20 million of subsidy that's available for local authorities to draw down on to invest in infrastructure for their residents and for visitors to their area. But as I say, it's a start. We need multiples of that going forward in terms of investment to offer charging infrastructure to the millions of homes that don't have off-street parking today and don't have access to those charge points. And in terms of democratization, it's really important this, because if we see that roads are democratized and you can see how they're paid for, if you can see that energy systems are democratized and see how they're paid for, we should have a very similar approach to that public infrastructure to EV public infrastructure in our mind. It can't just be for people who have the benefit of off-street parking, large driveways, or people have the benefit where they can go to rapid chargers on a regular basis. We need people who can charge outside their homes at relatively low cost as well. And that's what we need to do, and that's something which we're very proud of, is that by utilizing existing infrastructure and working within those constraints, not having to create those new connections to the electricity grid or have to look at very large civils works, we're deploying charge points at the moment for a very small amount, which then means that we're able to offer a pay-as-you-go tariff to customers, which is just above what you might expect on a residential tariff. There are areas that we still need to work on. From government, we need to look at the tax regime around EV charging. So something which I do talk about quite a lot is VAT. If you're at home and you purchase electricity to charge your car, you're paying 5% VAT. And if you're on the street using an electricity charge point, even though you are a resident in that area and you have the same car, you're paying 20% VAT. So there's conversations that we want to have out there around how do we incentivize and make it socially fair for everybody to own or at least drive an EV.
Very good. Thank you very much indeed. I'll open up now then to some questions from our online audience. I think the first one you may have touched on slightly with that VAT question there. So Wesley Delsink asks, and I know ubitricity is not just a UK company, but a pan-European company asks, compared to countries like the Netherlands and Germany, why is the take-up of charging infrastructure in the UK relatively small?
Well, there's 2 points there. So for ubitricity, actually, the largest market is the UK. By far, much larger than Germany, much larger than the Netherlands, and even for France, where I'm also responsible for the rollout there. But in terms of the general look at EV charging infrastructure, I think it's our approach to new technology. We are very much in that test and learn phase where we are looking at different technology providers. We're looking at the market to kind of come up with a solution a little bit in the UK so that we don't have too much of a centralized government involvement in making those decisions before we've actually understood what consumers want. And I think actually in general, that's the right approach for the time being. However, we do need to get to the stage very soon where we make those big decisions around, okay, so we need this proportion of on-street chargers for residents, we need this proportion of home chargers, so for new builds or renovation works, how do we build that into building standards? And then we need this proportion of rapid chargers on our main arterial roads, the motorways, so that people can then use those for range extension or as the charger of last resort, so you don't run out of power. And I think that strategy is now starting to develop. And what needs to come is the firm plan, and then with the firm plan comes the investment decisions from both the public and private sector. And I wouldn't say that necessarily the Netherlands have got it completely right either. I think we will have a different solution for the UK.
Very good. A very simple, practical nuts and bolts question now from Adam Lamalette, who asks about the specifics of charging using a ubitricity charger. Is the lamppost restricted to only EV and plug-in hybrid vehicles?
Yeah, it is something we get asked about quite often, actually. So we don't. So this is another part of the ubitricity model, is that we don't own the charge points. They are publicly owned charge points by the local authorities, and so the rules governing the highways and the parking are also in the realm of the public sector. So we do have some local authorities that we work with where they have decided to dedicate those bays for EVs and plug-in hybrids. They tend to be local authorities with very few charge points. And so what they're looking at there is that they want to dedicate that to give the access to also a very small number of EV vehicles, because the EVs are outnumbered by internal combustion engines, and also there are very few charge points in that area. And it works well there as the interim step. We also have local authorities, predominantly in London, where actually they have gone beyond that now, and the density at which they're installing ubitricity charge points is such that you don't want to dedicate the bays, because actually one thing we've grown to understand for local authorities, it costs quite a lot of money to dedicate a bay in terms of going through the permissions, the public consultations, and then carving out that piece of land for a single use. But also, you don't need to. When you've got a road like Sutherland Avenue near Maida Vale with 24 ubitricity charge points, every single lamppost has been converted. You don't need to dedicate those bays, because actually 3 parking spaces around that lamppost are within reach, and so you have over 70 charge points effectively on that street. And so Westminster is the local authority there, and they've chosen not to dedicate those bays. So we do work with local authorities to help them with their strategy, but ultimately it's their decision. If they dedicate the bays, great, but we do see that as a bit of an interim step, because when you have millions of vehicles parked on the street wanting to charge, you're not going to then put blue lines around every single parking space for EVs.
Sounds like you have an interesting issue to contend with on that one. A final question then on range awareness and range anxiety. We haven't really touched on that in this session, but Alison asks, he thinks that range anxiety is falling away and that we need to start talking more about range awareness. Is that something that ubitricity is looking into?
Yes, and it's something which we do think is falling away, actually. People have become very used to thinking that they've got a full tank of fuel of being around 400 miles, 500 miles or so. But then people, very rarely drive around all the time with a full tank of fuel. It's sort of a third or 25% full quite a lot of the time. So people, when they start to understand that actually the way they drive their cars today, they can't do 500 miles without refueling anyway. When you look at an EV, then you think, well, actually, you could more or less do the same amount of range. And what we do is that we are encouraging customers to then plug in whenever they're parked. That helps them with the range anxiety. It helps them with also using low cost, low carbon power when it's available, because typically charging at home or on the street or at work is cheaper, and you can have those renewable backed tariffs that was spoken about earlier. But also then you're helping the grid as well. You're also available for that smart charging. So I can talk about this from a personal point of view as well. So I drive into London at the moment from outside. It's around a 28-mile round trip, well, not round trip, one way. And that's typically the average distance anybody would be traveling in a day in their car. And you can then recharge from an emergency charge point in around an hour and a half, just under an hour and a half on that. So range anxiety, I think, is falling away, but behavior change is happening. So people are living with EVs. They're understanding that, yes, you may plug in slightly more often, but unless you're going for those very long journeys, beyond the range of your battery in your car, you typically won't have to charge en route. And if you do charge en route, then you're within 25 miles or so of a rapid charger on a motorway to then get you there. So I think it's becoming less of a barrier. What's becoming more of a barrier what we're getting is that having access to a charger where you can charge overnight or during the day is becoming a question. And obviously the renewal of the car stock in the market, how quickly can we get EVs onto the second-hand car market, is a barrier at the moment as well. So I think those are two areas that we're very keen on helping to address.
So thanks very much indeed to all our panelists. We will now open up the conversation to questions between you on the panel. So Daniel, this is a question to you, and it's a question around to what extent price transparency for customers is important. What are your thoughts on that one, please?
So I think it will be increasingly important as the market develops and people are having more options about where to charge. Our view is that you can't get any clearer than just a pence per kilowatt hour rate and a flat rate at the moment. That allows people then to compare it also with their home. So where if you're going to be charging at home for the majority of time or at work, you want to be able to compare it with that. So anything which moves away from that, perhaps a sort of a minimum charge or plug-in charge or a time-based charge rate, means that you can't actually compare too easily as a consumer and quickly, because they want to be able to compare quickly. So I think it will become important, but I think there are there's work going on in this space from government looking at how do we create that standardized pricing, at least how do you market that to customers, and then there'll be options behind that around subscription models and memberships and all the other ways that you can give added value and benefits to a particular customer segment. But at the very least, for us, a pay-as-you-go tariff, which is kilowatt hour, you can't get any simpler than that.
Well, thanks so much indeed to our questions from the audience and from those questions between you on the panel. And perhaps one last final single question from me. I mean, if there was one thing that you were looking for in terms of a green recovery and the e-mobility sector, Daniel, what's your sense of the one thing that you would like to see to speed up e-mobility and the green recovery?
So we have some very good ambitions set for 2030, 2035, 2050, and we know what's happening this year, but that middle ground is pretty opaque and vague at the moment from government. So what we're really looking for is around some firm policy, some firm regulations, some firm subsidy schemes, some firm targets to be met on that middle ground, and that will then allow business and the public sector to plan for and then start to really force those green shoots upwards.